Well, hello, it is a beautiful August day. So we are in August, which is really when you start noticing, I don't know if you're like me, but you start noticing those slight transitional things that make you start thinking a new season is coming. Now, August is still hot. It is often dry in Iowa where I live. But right now we're getting a little bit of a reprieve. We've had some rain, a couple inches of rain recently. We have had some cooler weather, but more so, you can just tell the sun has turned slightly more golden, what I call a little bit lazy, and you can just tell fall is around the corner. So what I always am doing here when we get towards late summer is usually not planting too much, just because I've been keeping everything going maybe all season. The watering's getting to me, but guess what? This year's been slightly different in that we've had a few rains, and it makes me feel a little bit more of a reprieve, so I'm going to do a little bit of planting, mostly because I always get the question, when do you plant, when do you plant? And guess what? It's when you can find the plants, when you have the time. But I want to go over today on some different things, why I'm planting now and what I'm going to plant. We're going to end here in one of my favorite areas, which, can you see the color behind me? The Rudbeckia back there, that Goldstrom Rudbeckia, is just taking off right now, and it is looking beautiful. I love the bright yellow color I can see from the house and can see all throughout my yard. So I thought we're going to start by planting a hydrangea, actually a couple of them. I have one planted, but I want to plant another one. And I thought this would be a good time to go over why I'm planting it now, because a lot of people are scared to plant in late summer and fall, and it's a great time to plant. So we are over across my driveway. So this is an area I see from my kitchen window. And this year I planted 3 big containers. You may have saw the video where I planted some white mandevilla, some senecio angel wings, some salvia in them, and I really actually love how they're looking. But also within this flower bed, I needed some other blooming plants right now. And you can see I just planted one, and it's a Bobo hydrangea. Bobos are one of my favorite. I have them all along my mom's front porch. They've been there about 6 years. They do beautiful. They get about 4 foot tall and wide for me. You can trim them back and shape them as needed, but they bloom on new and old wood, meaning you don't have to worry about the trimming of them. I trim them in, early spring, late winter, and they just look gorgeous. So I'm going to plant a couple of them here, and one specifically already is done. But what I want to talk about is, can you plant in the fall? Can you plant in late summer? Yes, you can. The big time I don't plant is when things are extra stressful. So if we are in extremely dry or hot weather, I don't plant plants. But also think of it this way. If the plants are sitting at your nursery, if they're sitting at the garden center and they're keeping them alive, you can too. It's that easy. We can keep plants alive at home. We can plant them anytime. You just have to know how to care for them and what you're dealing with. So that's what we're going to talk about. Since we're getting really close to fall, I do one thing slightly different, but otherwise it's just to plant a plant. So when I'm planting something this time of year, I will do the same exact process as any other time. I dig my hole, obviously you can say roughly 2 times the size, but otherwise we're going through the same motions here. Now, this area is nice and beautiful, loamy black soil. So I don't want to amend it. I don't need to amend it. I'm really blessed, I do admit, with wonderful soil, but it's always, if you feel like you are lacking in your soil, amend it up to 50% with a nice compost, a good manure that's composted. Any of that's going to help add nutrients to your soil. And this bed I do add compost to. I try to yearly, so that's why I'm not amending the soil here. Otherwise, it's always a good idea just to add a little something to it. So right here, you can see how quickly and easily that hole was made. That's how beautiful it is. So as opposed to other times of the year, when we're in spring, early summer, I will always fertilize something when I'm planting it, along with the root starter. In this case, since we're going into fall, I do not fertilize. When we're getting into late summer, early fall, that's when it signals to plants that they're going to start drawing in. They're going to start slowing down because eventually they're going to get dormant, and that's signaled by daylight hours. They're starting to change. They're starting to get darker earlier. We have less daylight hours in the day, and that lets plants know that's their time to begin the process of slowing down. That means we don't want to stimulate them too much with fertilizers, which can push them to try to grow too much new growth. And then if that doesn't harden off properly, when we start getting really cold, that can cause a lot of dieback. So I do not fertilize in late summer or early fall through the rest of the year. But what I do is the same thing as the rest of the time, and that's always make sure I use Biotone. So no matter when I'm planting a plant, I will always use Biotone starter. You know I love Espoma products. And the reason I love Biotone is because it's just a good root stimulator starter. It adds really good microbiome so those roots can really start getting a hold. It's not going to push the plant for tons of new growth. Instead, it really helps those roots want to go into the ground. And that's important because even when we get cold, the ground stays warm. So those roots are going to be active well into December here where I live in Southeast Iowa. So once I have that right in the ground, which it does have always remember with any fertilizer or any organic item like Biotone, it does have an odor that if you're not used to, I live on a farm. So to me, this odor is actually nice compared to some of the other odors you can have sometimes. So this I don't think about, but some people that have never used it before think, oh, is that the smell it should have? It is. Just trust that. So what we're gonna plant today is a hydrangea. And I'm planting, like I said, my Bobo, which Bobo are one of my favorites only because I love all hydrangea. To me, it all depends on your zone you grow and live in, and then the light requirements you have, and what area and size you have. So I have limelight hydrangeas over a big row of them, about 18 of them along my other side. And that's because they're against a field. They can get as big as they want. I want them to get 8-10 foot plus. This one over here, it gets a good amount of sun, but it gets a little bit of shade. These Bobo can take a little bit of shade. They like 6 hours of sun, but they can take a little bit of shade. And also, they don't get quite as big. They get more that 4 foot mark, which on this side is more what I want. So that's how you have to pick a hydrangea for the size you have. Now, what I like about them is they open up white. As they age, they'll get just a little tinge of blush on them, and then they dry right on the plant. The important thing to remember, and this goes, each hydrangea can be different. You have to know the type. This is a panicle or paniculata hydrangea, which means they bloom on old and new wood. So I trim mine late winter usually. But also what's great about them is I don't touch them. I don't even deadhead them. I like to leave these blooms on all winter long. Sometimes they break off over the winter, blow away, that's fine. Otherwise, I leave them because they just add some winter interest. So you don't have to do anything to them. That's the wonderful thing. Now, if you want, you can cut them and have a beautiful dried arrangement in the house too if you cut them late in the season. So I'm just gonna finish by putting the soil around and we'll water it. I always start with a well-watered plant whenever I'm planting it. You wanna make sure it has a lot of moisture because then it accepts that first watering really well. So then I make sure to water it at least a few gallons. So if it's, say, you buy usually plants in number size containers. So like this is a number 2. I will do at least 2 gallons. So I'll usually match that amount to the amount of gallons I plant and I actually water it with. When you water it, it's not only for watering, it's also to get out any of those extra air bubbles when you put the soil back around. So it really is important. Now, obviously this is a new plant. So all throughout the fall, even when the weather gets cooler, I'm gonna need to water this if I'm not getting ample rain. Ample rain is at least 1 inch a week. I don't get that usually, even into the fall. So I will definitely be supplementing this with water, but I will not be fertilizing it. Of course, you can still fertilize and should fertilize your annual containers, things like that, because they're gonna just die when the frost comes anyway. But plants like this, you don't need to fertilize, just make sure you have that good root starter to make sure their roots are going into the soil. That's what you want. So now for years, I will have beautiful blooms over here. I can look out my kitchen window and see. Along with this, I have a few other grasses I want to plant, and we're going to talk about weeding today because weeding is one thing that I never talk about on videos. That does not mean I don't do it. And I thought, even though it sounds boring, we're going to talk about weeding because, you know, it's just one of those tasks that can be mindless, but it makes you feel good when it's done. My next planting is some grasses I need to add to the area that I did a video on a few months ago. So this is a new path I had put in this spring. It's amazing it's only been this year because so many of the plantings have really taken off. So on one side of the path, I did beautiful, large, lush perennials. On this side, since these trees eventually will grow a little bit, I'm doing a mix of plantings that will do well once these trees get taller. Now, they're slender trees. They're Regal Prince oaks. And they always stay in upright, more slim nature as they grow, but they do, you know, get a little bit of width to them. So underneath them, I'm doing a grid of Terra dropseed, which is a prairie dropseed grass. And you can see eventually, they're small now, but they're eventually gonna grow into each other. My whole thing when I'm doing perennial beds, I try to pack them so full, seriously, this is how my mom always did it too, that the weeds can't grow. But in their first few years, you can definitely have weeds grow because things are just getting established. So we'll talk about the weeding here after. Actually, let's just talk about the weeding first. I'm gonna go through and start weeding right now. Whenever you till soil new, so whenever, like this was all just grass, like my yard, and had been for 100 years probably, or more. Whenever you till that soil fresh, you're gonna bring thousands of weed seeds to the light, to the air, to the moisture. That's what they need to start thriving and growing. Now, I did put mulch down, but I only put about a 2-inch layer or less because I didn't want to inhibit any of the plantings I planted. I want a lot of these to naturalize. I want the Monarda or bee balm to be able to naturalize, the penstemon to naturalize. So in order for it to do that, I didn't want too heavy layer of mulch. Well, you can still again get weeds that come in through that, especially at the edges where it's always usually where there's a little bit of bare soil more too that the weeds are gonna start. So I'm gonna show you some of the weeds and I'm gonna talk about how I'm gonna tackle them. Now, in some of my established planting beds, the ones I've had for years, I go through maybe every other week and do some light weeding as I see it. On a bed like this, I have to have a little bit more of a tactile way I go about it because I'm gonna show you how there's quite few weeds, and if you let them go too long, they're gonna become aggressive because they'll start having seeds and they'll start moving and naturalizing. So let's talk about it. This is the new path area I've been talking about. Now, this was just planted this spring, and eventually this bed is gonna be bigger, but along the edge here, you can see already, I've been coming out every week or two, and you can see all along here, I'm getting the weeds. Now, these weeds are pretty easy to, pick up. They're pretty easy to make sure you remove them, but the problem is if we keep them here too long, they grow tons of seeds and they will just branch off and continue to start more and more plants. So when it's really nice and damp like it is right now and the soil has a good moisture level to it, I will pull them out because I know I can get all that root. Now when it starts getting dry and I don't think I can pull them out, I will then make sure I dig them out because I want to get as much root as I can. If I leave even a partial amount of the root, just like with dandelions, if I leave that in the soil, it's going to eventually pop right back out into a weed. Same with any of these little branches on the weed itself. If these fall off and stay on the soil, if they just like lay on the bare soil, they're going to root down and start. We don't want that. So I'm going to go through and start making sure I weed out all of these. So all along here, I begin and I just start to pull out what I can. If I don't think I'm going to get those roots, I will then, like I said, dig them out. Now, the important thing is I just keep a little trowel with me usually to do that. But sometimes I use even just a knife. I don't know if any of you, did any of you? So my mom was a gardener too, of course, and still is. And even actually both my grandmas too. They all, if a knife in the kitchen would become not as useful in the kitchen, they would relegate it to outdoor use. And we would have these knives that we used outside. And that's a lot of times what my mom would use for weeding. And I got really used to that because it has a thin blade that you can go down and actually get those roots with pretty easily. So if that's something you would feel comfortable with, an old kitchen knife is a great way to actually use it for weeding. Now, if you don't feel like you have a knife you want to use, because usually I like my knives enough, and I don't know, I think if you buy good knives, they do keep longer, if not most of your lifetime. I will go to secondhand stores and I will buy actually old knives, and I think that's what my mom has done too. And then I will use those. Now like this one, I've let go maybe a little too long. I can see it has beginning to get some seeds on it. You don't want those seed heads on your weeds. That's very much when it's going to start becoming overwhelming to a point where you may not be able to get them all. So that's why we want to make sure we come out and do this. And the big reason I'm having so many right now is just recently we've had some really good rains. That's always when the weeds really will start popping up because they've been sitting dormant maybe, and all that moisture is getting to them. But I am making sure I get, if you see here, I'm getting those roots. And that's what's really important with these weeds. If you don't get the roots, they're gonna pop back up. But if you can get the roots, it will really help. Now along the edge here, it looks like I could put a little bit more mulch. I just haven't done it because I never quite decided what my edge was gonna be on this flower bed. I know next year I want to extend it almost double the depth and encompass all this grove of trees I have going and do more of these grasses then underneath all that. So until then, I had kind of was hoping to wait and not do too much mulching because anytime you dig things up, you'd like to mulch after the fact. So I'm gonna go through and keep weeding, and then we have a couple plantings yet to do. So in a short time, I have more weeding to do, but I got quite a few weeds you can see in here. Now, the big thing to remember with these, I will not put them on my compost pile because they could have seeds in them. I know some people solarize them, so they put them in plastic bags or in sheets of plastic, let the sun bake them until there could be no viable seeds or anything in them. I just don't. I discard them. I do not compost them or anything. I just think weeds aren't worth the hassle. So instead I will discard these, but I do have more weeding to do. So this is my thing I carry around with me pretty much all summer. If I'm doing any type of weeding, I have this trug with me, and that's what I fill up as I go. I just find it easiest. So now I'm gonna plant a few more grasses in here. You can see just in a couple months, I planted some pretty small ones. Some of them are almost just the size of a plug when I planted them. And look already how they're growing really well. So I love prairie dropseed grass. The terra variety I think can be a little bit more contained, which I like too. And what this is going to be is just a sea of beautiful grass foliage. And I really like it because this time of year you can see they get plumes on them. So they get these airy wisps of plumes. So eventually these will get, pretty good size. They'll get 24, 36 inches tall and wide, so they'll grow into each other. I have them about 2 feet apart because I want them to really mound into each other and just overgrow and encompass all of this area, so I don't need to mulch it. What I'll do is every spring, since everything planted in here is perennials, I have some baptisia in here, some penstemon, things like that, I can just mow it all down, mulch all that back into the soil, so it's just its own ecosystem eventually. But I'm gonna plant a couple more of these grasses because for some reason I always had miscounted, never quite got them right. What's great about good grasses is look at that root structure. These hold onto your soil so well. They do well during droughts because they have such a good root structure, and they really hold on and just help with any type of issues you could have. So what I'm doing is just breaking it up slightly like I always do, but then I'm going to just dig my hole right here. So I knew where my spots were that I needed these, so it was pretty much ready to go. And I don't need too big of hole. And since I have the mulch, yeah, I'm a little careful, but honestly, not that careful. The only thing I am doing is the biotone. I'm gonna make sure to put that down in the hole, and then I can put this right in here, and it's ready to go. So this again shows fall planting is definitely doable. And I always think it's funny when people ask, do you plant in the fall? Because that's a question I get almost daily. And absolutely, I plant whenever I can find the plants, when I have the time, and when I feel the weather and season is working for plants. Because the thing is, I only have so much time to be able to keep everything watered, so I try to only plant in a year what I know I can take care of. Eventually, things like these perennials are gonna take care of themselves year after year. But in that first year or two, I'm gonna need to baby them. So I only plant what I can, but otherwise, fall is a great time to plant. So I have a couple more of these to go, and I'll show you the finished product. This is the area that I've been weeding and planted, and you can see now, this year, these grasses may look small. Next year, they're gonna really start filling in, and they're gonna almost just be covered in a sea of green here that's mixed in with, it's gonna be blooming baptisia. It's gonna be beautiful all together. So now that everything's done, I just, I think it's amazing how quickly things like perennials can take off, especially when you think about all of these too were just planted this year. And now I still get to enjoy them for the full time this year, let alone for years to come. The pollinators have been loving them. All these things have really just been taking off, really making me happy. I hope you can see that the number one thing to take out of this is fall is for planting. You do not have to wait till spring. You can plant any time of the year. You just have to know how you take care of it. Obviously, watering is always going to be key, and that means up until the ground freezes and makes the plants go dormant. For me, that's not usually until sometimes in December. So if they are stressed and we are dry up until then, I'm going to keep watering. But I'm not going to fertilize anytime really August, late August or after. That's when I'm done fertilizing. So when you plant in the fall, you don't have to fertilize, but doing that good root starter is gonna make sure it helps. So I hope you can see that gardening can work however you want it to work. If you can take care of the plants, you can plant them and you can have a beautiful garden. It takes time, it takes effort, but hey, if it didn't, would it be fun? So I hope you enjoyed the process. I hope you got something out of it. And as always, I hope you share this video around, because if you enjoyed it or if you didn't enjoy it, someone else might. I garden here in Zone 5B in Southeast Iowa. but we all have different ways of doing it, even within our same zone. So we can all learn from each other, grow, and grow some plants too, hopefully, along the process. So share the video, check my website, wyseguide.com, for recipes, for more advice. It's all on there. Until next time, I hope you're planting something.